The Simplified Loader template includes multiple controls to ensure that the data entered in the spreadsheet is valid. To enhance validation, administrators can create rules based on Excel formulas. These validation rules execute every time a user performs a transaction using the Simplified Loader template. To set up an Excel formula-based validation rule, go to the Admin panel. From the Controls drop-down menu, select the option Excel Formula-Based, Validate Transaction. This will open a new form where you need to provide the cell reference containing the validation formula. There are other sections in this form, but let's first focus on writing a formula for validation. We will return to this form later and review the other sections. Let me close this form and the admin panel. The slide on my screen displays two scenarios that we will cover in the demo. We will define a rule to check if the line amount matches the sum of distribution amounts, and a second rule to ensure that an exchange rate type is entered when the currency is not USD. Let's review the key steps involved in defining transaction validation rules. The first step is to identify the section where validation should occur. This is important because if a validation applies to a child record, the validation rule will trigger multiple times, depending on the number of child records present within the header. For example, if an invoice contains 5 lines and the validation section is defined as invoice line, Simplified Loader will automatically execute the validation 5 times, once for each line. After identifying the correct section, write a formula in Excel to validate the transaction. The formula entered for transaction validation in the Simplified Loader template must follow these guidelines. The first guideline states that the Excel formula must be written in a field that is part of the validation section. The second guideline is that the formula must return either true or false. If the formula evaluates to false at runtime, Simplified Loader will fail the transaction. The third guideline ensures that when referencing fields in a child section, an Excel aggregate function like sum, min, max, etc. must be used. It is also important to understand that all sections under the validation section are considered child sections. Let me illustrate this with an example on my screen. If the validation section is set as invoice header, the formula can reference fields at the line, distribution, or attachment levels. Any reference to a child section must include an aggregate function. The second example is where the validation section is set at the line level. In this scenario, the formula can reference a field at the distribution level, but it must use an aggregate function. Let me go back to the slide containing the formula guidelines. Point D mentions that the formula can use relevant fields from the validation section. Point E states that relevant fields from parent and child sections can also be used. To explain valid parent and child sections, I will bring up another slide. The first example on the slide considers the invoice header as the validation section. In this case, relevant fields from child sections like line, distribution, or attachments can be used in the formula. In the second example, we consider the line section as the validation section. In this case, you can only use relevant fields from the invoice header and distribution sections. Fields from the attachment section cannot be used, as the attachment section is neither a parent nor a child of the line section. Similarly, in the last example, where the attachment section is considered the validation section, the formula can only reference relevant fields from the invoice header section. No reference can be made to the line or distribution sections, as these sections are neither a parent nor a child of the attachment section. Once the formula is entered in the data sheet based on the guidelines in Step 2, go back to the Excel formula-based, Validate Transaction screen, enter the cell reference of the formula, and save the validation rule. The validation rules are stored locally in Excel and will automatically execute when the user performs operations using the Simplified Loader Excel template. Now let's start writing the first formula to validate if the line amount equals the sum of all distribution amounts. As a first step, I will identify the validation section. Since I want to perform validation at the line level, the validation section will be line. I will use any field at the line level to write the formula. Let me start the formula with an if statement and refer to the field containing the line amount. Let's complete the condition by comparing this with the sum of the distribution amount column. I will use the aggregate function sum and refer to the column distribution amount. Since we are using an aggregate function, I will select a few rows from the distribution amount column. Let me continue to the next parameter of the if condition to return a value if the condition is true. I will simply enter the output as true. For the third parameter, I will enter false. This completes my formula for validating that the invoice line amount must match the sum of all distributions. Please note that we entered the formula in cell Q6. We will use this cell reference when defining the validation rules. I will now navigate to the admin panel and open the Validate Transaction form. I will enter the cell reference Q6 and click the Convert button. You can see the three fields in the Create or Edit section are populated based on the formula entered in cell Q6. Let's complete the values in other fields. I will give the rule name as line amount equals distributions. The sequence is 10. The related operation is create invoice. This means that the rule will trigger when a user clicks on the create invoice operation. Finally, I will enter the error message as the line amount does not equal the sum of distributions. Whatever message is entered in this field will be displayed to the user if validation fails. Click on the Save button to save the rule. This rule is now saved locally in the Excel template. Before validating the impact of the first rule, let's also define the rule for currency exchange type validation. To recap, we want to define a validation rule to check if the invoice currency is not USD. If so, the user must populate the conversion rate type field. Before writing the formula, I will add the conversion rate type field to the data sheet. Let me now start writing the formula with an if statement. In the if condition, I will check for two conditions, so I will add an and operator. My first condition is that the currency is not equal to USD. The second condition is that the rate type is not populated. If this condition holds true, then I want to fail the validation. So I will put false in the second parameter and true in the third parameter. Please note that the formula is entered in cell H6. I will now go back to the admin panel and open the Validate Transaction form. We can see that the first formula we saved earlier in the demo is displayed in the existing rules section. To start building the rule for the second scenario, let me enter H6 in the cell reference and click the Convert button. Let me enter the rule name as Rate Type Check. Enter sequence as 20. The related operation is Create Invoice. Finally, I will enter the error message as Enter Conversion Rate Type when invoice currency is not USD. Click on the Save button to save the rule. This rule is now saved locally in the Excel template. I will now close the forms. Please note that once the rules are saved, you do not need to keep the formulas in the data sheet, and users are also free to move columns around. I will now test the two rules defined for this demo. To do so, I will copy sample transactions from the sample data sheet. Please note that with the copy-paste action, I have also deleted the header conversion rate type column that I inserted earlier to build the formula. In the first invoice record, I have 2 lines, with 2 distributions each. I will change the amount on the third distribution so that the line amount is not the same as the sum of distributions. In the second sample invoice, I will change the line amount on the first invoice line. To test the rules, I will highlight the 2 invoices and click the Create Invoice operation. As you can see, both invoices failed with an error message. Please note that this validation is triggered before passing the values to Oracle. The user may want to know more details and the values that caused this error. To get more details, the user can insert the field formula calculation details from the About sheet into the data sheet. With the new column added, I will perform the Create Invoice operation again. Notice that the complete execution details of the formula are captured in the Formula Calculation Details column. Now let's validate the second rule for the conversion rate type. In the third invoice, I will use GBP as the invoice currency. You may notice that I do not have the header conversion rate type field present in the data sheet. Let me upload the third invoice. Simplified Loader immediately displays an error message. At the same time, the Formula Details column shows all formulas evaluated by Simplified Loader for this invoice upload. To fix this error, the user will need to insert the header conversion rate type column. I will insert this column and enter a value for the rate type field. Let's attempt to load the invoice again. Since this invoice passes all validations, it is successfully loaded into Oracle Fusion. I hope you liked the demo.